Hey everyone, welcome back to another just in the series of my mentorship series or the awakening series. This is really around today's topics around this idea of manufacturing consent. We'll talk about what that means. Ultimately, it's a lot about freedom, right? And this kind of comes from the previous course in this series on rethinking thinking, really talking more about understanding the cognitive biases that we wear, right, and the lenses that we wear. With that, getting a sense on, are we actually thinking for ourselves? And this kind of course piggybacks on that, takes to the next level of talking about the different ways that we're just controlled, right? So let's jump into this. I think there's a lot of different pieces. We'll start off with groupthink. We'll move into how we're being controlled through hypnosis, debt, fear, hope, even disease and shame. Again, this is going to be one of those. It's one side or the other. You're going to probably get a visceral reaction to some of the things that I say today. And it's probably because we've been programmed to already have thoughts on some of these topics. So I'm letting you know now, this is one of those, I don't know how to even to bring it up. Otherwise, this may just be like a litmus test to determine what programming we've already have, because some of these topics will be maybe polarizing. And so I think the important thing to understand is all I want to do is just speak logically to some of these issues. And I don't have any political leaning at this point. You'll find out that I feel like those that can see what's going on almost transcend any sort of political divide. And we're able to actually understand what's really happening. And a lot of this is intentional and unintentional consent being manufactured. That's the title of the talk. So anyways, let's jump into it. I think one of the first ones to think through is this idea of, let's start with the least sinister of these, and something that actually just happens fairly naturally. And this is something that happens in group dynamics. It's called groupthink. So this was a term that was coined in 1972 by Irving Yannis, who was a Yale University social psychologist, and talking about how this phenomenon, I guess is whatever you want to consider it, occurs when individuals reach an agreement without actually having thought or evaluating any certain idea for themselves. And so we see that there may be those who may actually internally oppose an idea and yet still remain silent because of a number of different factors, whether that's ranging from a desire to fit in, uncertainty on their actual knowledge of a topic. It could be anything from a strong desire for this cohesiveness of a group, right? Which may produce this tendency to agree at all costs, which gives way to this idea that the loudest voice in the room sort of wins scenario, right? So I think when we actually look through some of the signs that Janus identified in his research, was being overly optimistic about a viewpoint without actually having analyzed it. Okay, with ignoring any sort of warning signs or holes in the logic to any sort of point of view, believing that everyone that's being silent actually just consents to this or agrees that this is true, viewing that anyone who has a different opinion is either wrong or wanting to create conflict, and ultimately kind of pressuring people who think differently than you to conform or protecting other members from even hearing any conflicting information. Now, these are things that we can probably resonate with some of these already, but one of the strongest ones to kind of point out is this idea that, and we're going to talk more about this later, but the quick takeaway is just because nobody's speaking up doesn't mean that it is right, and it doesn't mean that everyone's even in agreement. Right? This is kind of going back to the last course on rethinking thinking, of this idea that there's this cognitive bias of false consensus effect, which is, diving into this concept that just because nobody is speaking out, people just assume that, everyone's agreeing with this. But in reality, someone may say, and I'm using some terms from 1984 here, but ignorance is strength, war is peace, right? And people in the group may say, well, am I the only one that thinks this is wrong? And someone else may be thinking, well, I guess no one said anything, so I guess we all agree with this. It's such a powerful mechanism. And if we don't understand group dynamics, and if we don't have a solid grasp on who we are, and I talk about this in my personal branding course about really understanding your core values, understanding what you stand for and stand up to that defines your brand. If we aren't taking the courage to speak out, even, if we don't agree with something, even ultimately if it makes us vulnerable to attack or criticism or by those that want to either kind of maintain their bubble, right, and maintain that cohesion of the group, even when it means stifling dissent. The big picture here is that if we are to speak out, we are to speak truth in love, and that's a paraphrase from Ephesians 4:15. But on the other side, thinking through, if somebody else speaks up that maybe has a different viewpoint than we have, maybe we don't immediately shut them down because it defies, the cognitive biases that we've formed and the little, dare I say, kind of, walled defense that we feel safe inside of, right? We actually should be thinking about going into every conversation with this idea that maybe we have something to learn. And so when someone says something that's counter to our viewpoint, maybe they took that either one of two things. Either they're trolls, right? And that's an option. But more likely, maybe they are standing up to what they identify as groupthink, and maybe they took courage for them to stand up, and maybe we should actually not aid in and contribute in the suppression and control of free thought, and hear them out, and at least think through, right? And I guess, so kind of going back to this, for me it's this kind of concept of evaluating my belief structures, evaluating my biases, right? Asking myself, what am I being silent on? What perceptions have I allowed to be normalized because I didn't stand up to them? This is something that, again, going back to doing this in love, and not doing it in a way to prove people wrong, but doing it in a way to just say, hey, I don't think this is normal. And that's something that, I talked about in my last course. It's hard because when we see the amount of injustices and just at this point, the craziness that's going on in the world, it is almost too exhausting. It's almost to step in and do anything about it, right? And so we have to be like, well, let me just go back to my normal life. I can't, deal with this, so to speak. Let me kind of go back and just kind of, you got to put money in, get money, food on the table, that sort of thing. But every once in a while, we need to step up and say, hey, this isn't normal, right? Otherwise, what happens is that we'll just ultimately get bulldozed over. There's an interesting poem or prose, I guess. I'm not smart enough to know the difference of the two. So this it was written by this gentleman, Niemöller, however you pronounce it. Ultimately, it speaks to the cowardice of German intellectuals and the clergy that he was a member of. So it reads, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Again, this was written following the Nazis' rise to power and the subsequent, purging incrementally of different targeted citizen groups, right? One after another, these groups were being targeted, and people thought, it doesn't matter to me. That doesn't impact my day-to-day, until ultimately, this kind of points out is at some point there will be something that does impact you. And if we have given away all of our freedom, and if we've normalized this manufacturing of consent to the point where we are no longer, there's no mechanism for us to stand up anymore, and we're in totalitarianism. So this may seem, you may say, well, that was Nazi Germany will never happen again, or whatever you want to say. But I think that if we actually take a second and think for ourselves, what are the modern day issues that maybe we're not standing up to because we feel it's just not my fight, right? Maybe it puts a target on us unnecessarily. We don't have the time. We don't want to debate it on Facebook or whatever it is, right? We're so consumed with our lives that we can't fight every battle, right? But what are the key battles? What are the battles where we actually are losing freedoms, right? There's a Proverbs that's 31:8 that states, "Open your mouth for the mute and the rights of all who are destitute." This is guidance that says that we need to stand up for others, even if it doesn't impact us. And we'll talk a little bit about this kind of concept. Again, this today's is going to be pretty wide in scope because I'm trying to paint a bigger tapestry, and then we're going to bring it back in here. But knowing that, we may only have one voice. I get that, okay? But by speaking up and giving courage to those that are being stifled, silenced, right, by groupthink, by any of these other forms of control we're going to be speaking to, we actually can identify, together we will have power to actually make change. And so just think through, one voice does matter because it gives power to the next voice. So the big picture here is this concept of freedom of conscience, okay? And this is what it comes down to. For me, it's not actually about any one issue, okay? And you'll find that out, that I want free will to exist, okay? I want each of us to have freedom of conscience. I don't want you to impose your free will on me the same way I don't want to impose my free will on you, right? I don't want you playing, your music so loud that I hear it, and I don't want to play my music so loud that you hear it, sort of thing. Right? Just as an analogy there. I think what it really comes down to, though, is more than just being imposed on something that's inconvenient, but what are the things that are actually matter to us from a deeper level? And so we can look at the definition. I pulled this from the Office of the High Commissioner for United Nations on Human Rights. And it says, our most fundamental responsibility, okay, is to stand up and act for everyone's right to free choice, and particularly everyone's freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. So pretty strong statements here saying that, our fundamental right should be the ability to, if there's something that is a higher thought that we align on, whether it's a belief structure, religion, just a matter of conscience, we should not be forced against that. We should not be coerced against that, okay? This is a concept that is throughout most religions. When we think through Protestant Christianity, Joshua 24:15, then choose for yourself this day whom you'll serve, okay? In Islam, the Quran, right, reads, there shall be no compulsion in religion, okay? Sikhism, Granth Sahib writes, no one shall coerce another. No one shall exploit another. Okay. In the Baha'i, we have when freedom of conscience and liberty of thought and the right of speech prevail. So it's this all throughout this concept of freedom of thought, right? And in 1 Corinthians 10:29 reads, "For why should my freedom be judged by another's conscience?" Now, I think this is very powerful. I think that there are, areas where this is taken to an extreme, and I will be the first to agree with that. But I think the overall picture here is, if somebody wants to and has a desire to live by their conscience, and it doesn't impose will on someone else, I think we need to take that very, very seriously. Okay. When we look at who these advocates of freedom of conscience have been throughout time, we have, John Locke, Voltaire, Oliver Cromwell, Martin Luther, Thomas Jefferson, all the framers of the Declaration of Independence all had and all understood this concept. So the question becomes, are we putting our names on that list, right? Do we see the importance of advocating for others' freedom of conscience? And it's certainly something that that I'd like to kind of put my name on that list, right? And some of us may say, oh, yeah, I support that. But think how that actually plays out. Think, do we really mean this? Are we actually standing up for, do we really, willing to stand up for this? And we'll talk more about this in a little bit. So I want to move on to, we just kind of talked about this idea of groupthink. And I want to move on to the next one, which is hypnosis. And I believe that, our behavior is, often controlled by what we receive. And so let's talk about like this idea of engineering attention first, right? So the less obvious form of hypnosis is the engineering of attention. It's this media and software companies are all competing for our time so that they can earn our advertiser dollars. There's a very clear path to why this is happening, right? They're designed to grab and hold attention, whether it's TV, whether it's video games, whether it's social media apps, right? And they have really powerful minds working on this to make this happen. We read this throughout. We talked about this in in Rethinking Thinking about how this removal of the case of curiosity, et cetera, but when we're thinking through here about, let's just use movies as an example. So when we look at the way that movies have been engineered to play on the way they do action sequences, et cetera, it's there to actually make us feel things, right? And not just kind of like emotionally, but actually physically, right? We can see that there's very clear studies out. One example is the sociology and social emotional process of the cinema. And this one details this idea that there's actually, movies can make our heart rate increase. We can have, galvanic skin responses like chills, goosebumps, stuff like this, and other indicators of sociological arousal. So I think that's interesting when we look at how movies have evolved over time and how they've been used really to capture our attention. We'll see that their need for profits, their need to keep people in the theaters, their need to hold their attentions and compete with other movies, etc., that they have to continue to optimize this experience, right? And so they're doing this as a way to really tap into our subconscious or into our physiology to compete with all the other businesses that are trying to gain our time and money. So in this article, it actually did some research and points out that the length of time between the changing of camera angles set from 1930s to today, or in this study went to roughly 2010, I believe, went from 12 seconds, right, down to 2.5 seconds. So significant. So used to be every 12 seconds a frame would change, and now every 2.5 seconds. We've actually seen examples, if you look at any like Japanese media, it's incredibly even faster than that, crazier colors, sound effects, right? I feel like, for me anyway, like my viewpoint is that essentially Japanese media is where we will be in a few years if we have to keep this, this increasing our game, right? And increasing our levels of gaining attention. I think the other aspect of this is that social networks, and we talked about this before already, but social networks target us in a way where they're literally like engineering button. The like button, by the way, was the inventor of that, the engineer on that, described it as bright dings of pseudo-pleasure. Okay? Like this is literally like, this is what they know that they're doing. And they're creating this because, and we've seen studies from Harvard, from Stanford, UCLA, right? How it's the same brain circuits that are activated by eating chocolate or winning money, are activated when we see the number of likes on our social media posts and our social network, right? And these platforms are leveraged in the same neural circuitry, right, that slot machines use to keep people engaged in that and coming back to that, and an addictive behavior. We know gambling is an addictive behavior. So when we start looking at this concept, there's a book that Anna Lemke put out, Dopamine Nation. And she's an addiction expert, and she writes about how our smartphones are making us dopamine junkies. and really talks about that real freedom is regularly breaking free from our technology addiction. She recommends abstaining from using your smartphone for at least 24 hours by locking it in a drawer or going out. She says that the first 12 hours will be filled with anxiety, fear of missing out, but as time unfolds, that you'll experience a real sense of freedom. And I think when, I know that from personal experience, that for me, the secret to my productivity has always been taking a day a week off to digitally detox and be in nature, relax the mind, really regenerate, and then be ready to hard charge the next week. And so I encourage, my mentees as well to think about taking a day off a week and just completely removing yourself. I do that from Friday night to Saturday night because that's, the biblical Sabbath. But I think, any removal of technology for a period of time is going to help you mentally and perform even better physically. From my perspective, I look at this. There's different ways that the beauty of nature can bring this harmony with the natural and the spiritual, right? And connecting that, and how our mental powers will be really strengthened by beholding the beauty of nature. So we're kind of talking about this idea of hypnosis, right? And one of these kind of main forms that we see of hypnosis is this idea of copycatting, right? It comes from this desire to fit in. We may find ourselves, if we actually acknowledge that, if we're in a group doing body mirroring, somebody has their hands in their pockets, we put our hands in our pockets, right? Somebody crosses their arms, we fold our arms, right? We want to have consensus. And, it's this desire to be part of a tribe. It's this desire to fit in, to belong, that is essentially tapped into by brands, by different applications, right? It's a way to control us. We can think of this from an advertiser's perspective. Look, and it's subtle, not a big deal, maybe, right? But thinking through this idea that an advertiser takes somebody who maybe we aspire to, or we look up to, or we acknowledge is in a celebrity status or influencer status, and then they want to put their product and associate their product with that brand. Okay, so a brand associating with another brand, and by seeing that, we're going to form a positive image, right? So if we see something, with one actress drinking one brand and another actress drinking another brand, both of those actresses are going to, one, stimulate some sort of desire to drink that category, so they all win. Or two, if you really like that particular influencer, then you choose the brand in the category that they represent, most likely. So, I'll be the first to kind of just recognize that, there's a level of hypocrisy here, because I literally teach brands how to get people to fit into their tribe and how to tap into, the psychology of humans in order to associate our product with them. And so I get that, I'm part of the problem in some instances, but it comes down to, as a marketer, trying to use this positively and acknowledging that, that's the tendency to mimic, and the desire for that should be used in a responsible way. And so, through my career, I've been making stances of saying, I'm not going to work with these type of brands because I don't want to help them manipulate, or whatever it's going to be. But the bigger piece, and to come back to this, is just understanding. And if you haven't already taken the course Rethinking Thinking, recommend taking that. But really understanding the idea of copycatting, and it becomes this monkey see, monkey do mentality, right? It's this idea that we learn. And this is what we learned in the Rethinking Thinking course, is that during that programming period, we learn so much by imitating others. Okay, so what's dangerous with that is applications like TikTok, as an example. They build on a monkey see, monkey do, algorithms, I guess, or format, right? And this erodes this cognitive capability, like we stop thinking for ourselves because we're rewarded by copying a certain dance or a certain gesture or a campaign as a way to fit in, or isn't as a way to kind of create a following of your own. And while it may seem fun, like, oh, there's just really harmless dances, there are actually a lot of trends on there where, maybe I won't get into them, but ultimately it's kind of sick. Maybe I want to get into this now, but if you've looked into this, you know that there are trends where younger girls are mimicking things that older girls are doing, and those are things maybe they are more sexually provocative in nature. And so it's this understanding, and Claude Brissell writes that these repetitive words and sequences and gestures and things like this are merely methods of convincing the subconscious mind. So what are they learning as they are doing certain things, and I guess leveraging themselves and then getting responses from individuals for that? Are they being trained now that this is how I am to act outside, in the real world, so to speak? What's even more interesting is that this repetition actually kind of creates, these trends they can latch on really quick now, right? Before social media, it took forever to gain visibility. Like for a trend to take on, like it took forever, right? Sayings were much harder to turn into to become sayings, I guess. But with the connectivity of social media, we actually have sites like Talkwalker and other sites like that can kind of start mapping out how things go viral, and understanding that things can go viral in minutes. So what's the implication of this? Like, if we have not been training our mind, if we've been essentially training our minds one way or the other, we're training our minds. But if we've been allowing ourselves to just take on whatever's told to us, whatever's taught to us, whatever's shown to us, and we mimic that as a way to fit in, isn't that pretty dangerous, right? Like, when we look through this idea that social media has been an interesting unveiling of groupthink, to say the least, right? We see users joining on different trends, or participating in threads, etc., where they may not even understand the implications of what that is. And there may be cultural implications. There may be things that they're doing and saying that they think are funny, but they don't actually realize who that may be hurting, right? Because maybe things, they take a face value to things, when some objects and some symbols are actually associated with something much more. And so, I believe that we are ultimately conditioning ourselves and our nervous system, right, to being more vulnerable to this rapid spreading of what I call thought viruses. And this idea that an idea can take hold very, very quickly. Now, this could be an idea of the American dream, right, which has been manufactured and sold to us for a while, right? This concept of consumerism, right, about how we need to keep up with the Joneses, we need the new car, in fact, I was literally on a mentee call earlier today, and my mentee was saying, I want to do this, like going through the exercise, and so I do these exercises, like one of them is the Johari window model. Another one of these is the Ikigai, where we're actually going through and understanding their blind spots, understanding what it is that they're actually aspiring to. Looking at what are their internal motivations versus external motivations. And when we think through the internal motivations, that is where you're going to find happiness. The problem is that our internal motivations are actually conflicting with our external motivations. What I mean by that is those things that we say internally, I just want to, go live on a farm, be in nature, have time to just exist and explore and, be with my loved ones. Those are internal motivations, right? That's your body saying, this is what I crave. This is what will make me happy. But the problem is that we have manufactured this and sold this idea of consumerism, where you need to be a millionaire, you need, whatever the number is, right? Which is silly. There's this place on money, there's a place on things. I need the big house, I need the new car, right? Not a car, a new car, right? And that's interesting. When I'm talking to mentees, they say, I need a new car. Well, why does it have to be new, right? Or they'll say, I need to have money. Well, money's a construct. Why do you need money? Oh, because I want to have freedom. Well, then there's ways to get freedom without money. And the interesting thing is that, to this point is that we are actually jailed, right, by money. And I know that doesn't make sense, right? You think, well, if I had money, I'd be happy. I've had money, right? I've had a decent amount, okay? I've had a fairly successful career. More than enough to know that it's not what happiness brings. Those are external motivations that we need to shake off, okay? Let's talk about we're talking about being controlled by hypnosis, and another thing of being controlled by hypnosis is this idea that we don't have time to think for ourselves because we're chasing this American dream, right? Because we need to get the money, we need the new car, we need all of this, that we have to then work the extra shift or take on jobs that don't satisfy us or fulfill us because we need to make that money, right? So for most, this image that we're given is that our lives are, what our lives should look like is in reality somewhat unachievable, okay? It may be achievable for some, but for the majority, it's not achievable. So consumerism, directly results in reduced time, right? Reduced time with our family, reduced time doing things that make us happy, and reducing time, most specifically to this course, to think for ourselves. We may want to educate ourselves on topics that we find important, but for the pressure of deadlines, obligations, our curiosity has been dampened by our drive to quote unquote succeed. Now, there's so many pieces I want to unpack here. I'll just keep moving forward with this, but we've got to come back to this in a little bit. The big picture is Socrates wrote, beware of the barrenness of a busy life. You may be chasing after a dream that's not your dream. You may be chasing after a dream that was given to you. And as you're chasing this, you may actually find out that, one, it may not even be possible to achieve it. In my case, when I did achieve it, I realized it wasn't the dream that I actually wanted. And think about the time that's being wasted right now, and think about the contributions that you're making by not standing up, by not researching things for yourself, by not having a voice. Think of all the chaos that you're potentially, maybe, normalizing. I recommend each of us take an inventory of how we're spending our time. Really understand, how do we spend our time? What are we doing? What consumes us? And why are we doing what we're doing? We talked about in our last course this idea that we're on autopilot for a large degree. Okay, this is one of those exercises that starts breaking us out of this autopilot. Okay, there's a survey by Popular Science that showed how sports and TV and games were large factors in our time consumption. These are things that were engineered to grab our attention. Okay, let's use sports. Now again, I'm going to start touching on some. Up to this point, you may be like, "Yeah, Rob, I'm with you." I probably will touch on one thing in this that's going to irk you. Okay, when I do, realize I'm not attacking you. I'm attacking the system. Okay, I do think that there are people that prioritize sports over self-improvement. I think there are people that prioritize sports over family, over identifying what's their purpose, right? Over even making money, which is ironic, right? Because we can fit in, our desire to be part of this tribe can be immediately, you could walk into any bar that has any sports bar with a TV on, and if you walk in there and you're rooting for the same team that they're all rooting for, you're all buying each other beers, so to speak, okay? So I understand how this becomes so compelling because, and whether we realize it or not, so it plays two parts here. One part is, it's entertaining spectators. Wow, feats of athleticism. Okay, right? But deeper, because again, you got to never analyze things on the surface level. Going deeper, you're fitting into a tribe. You're feeling accepted. You're feeling this surge. When they're winning, you're actually piggybacking off of their accomplishments. But the problem is when they're losing, it also damages you, and now you're taking that on your family or your job or whatever it is. So have we given away our identity for a desire to fit in the tribe? Have we given away our time and our money for a desire to fit into a tribe? When we look at this notion of like, what is even a modern day Colosseum? Well, it's the same thing as they used to have. And like, it literally has a word in it, a Colosseum, right? Like, sports stadiums are modern day Roman Colosseums. Some of them are even called the Colosseum. In Rome, by the way, a Colosseum played a central role in maintaining political control over the public. That's what its role was. Literally research this, right? Here's from Durham University, how Roman Colosseums have been replaced by modern day stadiums for the same purpose. And that purpose was served as a tool, quote, I'm quoting here, serve as a tool to Roman emperors for political control, because Rome was indeed hungry for entertainment and distraction. It goes deeper into this. I'm going to keep this high level, although I will point out one other thing. Just a side note that those same Colosseums, and it wasn't that long ago, a few hundred years ago, those same Colosseums were, under Emperor Diocletian, and this is like maybe 500, 300, I guess it was, BC. Their sport was watching Christians being eaten by lions. Okay, so the same mob mentality, the same mentality of sport, and ultimately is found. It's got its roots in persecution of another sect, another religion, another belief structure. Right? They were literally feeding Christians to lions and burning Bibles in these Colosseums. So this has some pretty deep roots that you should probably think of. Right? Now, look. We may not be burning Christians at the stake or feeding Christians to lions, I should say, in Colosseums anymore, right? But, are those same gladiators, are we watching them on TV? And are they consuming our time, right? Are we allowing our time to be consumed by contestant shows? Are we exchanging our time and critical thinking for this mindless programming that's given to us that taps into us, right? Like, where does this actually come from, right? And is this just engineered to take our money, or is this an attempt to control us as well? Okay, I think that the question should be asked: is the engineering of attention just the result of greed or something more? We already just read about the Colosseums; those were there for political control. So, are we being controlled by the barrenness of life, as Socrates puts it? Right? Are we being controlled? Are we giving away our time in exchange for mindless entertainment? Are we giving away our voice for mindless entertainment? So we were talking earlier about this concept of consumerism and how really the role consumerism plays. And I think the next kind of piece is that, it really goes into this idea of being controlled by debt, right? Debt ultimately is one of the greatest ways to control. So let's talk, what is debt, first off, right? Over the last century, we have completely gone off the gold standard. So the idea that money used to be backed by gold. So money had value, intrinsic value. Like, this was a representation of what was in the bank, okay? FDR in 33, Nixon again in 71 have removed us from this gold standard. So this was more specifically, what I'm referencing is Executive Order 6102. This was in 1933 by FDR that forbade the hoarding of gold coin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, look, there's a lot more to this. It's actually very interesting if you want to look into it, that the price of gold went from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce as soon as they pulled it in. And so, the people that actually didn't give their money away, which was the rich people, many of them didn't put their gold, didn't fork over their gold, became very rich, like almost doubled their wealth overnight. That price, thinking through kind of, Richard Nixon then took and announced that we'd no longer convert, dollars into gold as a fixed value. So completely abandoning that. So what is money backed by now? If it's not backed by gold, it's not, what is it backed by? And if you're not aware of this yet, research this for yourself. I may cover this more in another lecture, another series, but ultimately understanding that if you're not awakened to the reality that we as a people and we as a collective federal government don't own our currency, okay? We don't even own the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve System sounds like it's like part of the Treasury, but it's not, right? So if you research this, you'll find very, very clearly that the Federal Reserve is privately owned. It's a for-profit banking cartel, okay? What's more is the Fed is exempt from paying federal taxes, local taxes, and state taxes. So they print money and never have to be impacted by that, right? So ultimately what I'm trying to get at here is that money, the way money is created in its simplest form, is that our government gives an IOU plus interest in the form of a U.S. Treasury bond, right, to these private, banking cartel that we call the Federal Reserve, okay? And this system, the Federal Reserve System, intentionally makes it sound like it's part of our government, but it's not. So the Fed will buy these Treasury bonds, bills, from money they just print out of thin air. So when they give us when we give IOUs, right, that we're going to pay this back, they give us money. So in all reality, money is debt. I think I'm going to cover this more in another course. I'll dive deep into this. For now, just start researching this on your own and understand that the Federal Reserve has made it. Well, I'm not going to get Federal Reserve. Let's just understand that money is debt. Okay, so by holding on to money, you're actually holding debt, which is super ironic. Okay, there's some articles about how you're not supposed to even understand the Federal Reserve, how it's but I'll get into this maybe another time. There's some other talk about how some people even think the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional. We'll actually jump into this in the course Public Secrets. But the big picture here is all I want us to do is awaken to the idea that most of us are willingly enslaving ourselves into a system that doesn't serve us. Okay? More than that, we are intimidated and pressured into giving years of our life, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars into systems which no longer guarantee that stability that we desire. We are going through and getting degrees that have no value, the same way that we're trying to earn money that has no actual value. Okay? Most of us are stuck in this vicious cycle of this idea that, the more we spend, the more we're in debt, so the more we have to work, right? So it's this concept that the more we work at wages that don't support the lifestyle that we've been told that we need to adhere to, right? The more we have to borrow. And the more we borrow, the more we spend, right? So the more we spend, the more we're in debt, so we have to work harder. It's literally a loop, and it's designed that way. This isn't a bug, this is a feature. Okay, now, who's the feature? Is it brands that are a problem? Is it large corporations? Yes. Okay, is it marketers? We play a role. Okay, understanding that there's a lot of implications to this, but ultimately we are in a wheel. Okay, we're told to experience life to its fullest. So get out there, and live your best life, right? But then we're told that best life requires all these material possessions that are way too expensive for us to afford. So now we have to spend our days grinding away so that we can have our best life that we'll may never achieve. Okay. More than that, for those that are actually building wealth and are saving and are doing it right, is it any wonder that there is a financial reset every 10 years and a large financial reset every generation? Okay, I'm just saying, this is just pattern matching. I'm just pattern matching here. If you look at the number of the dates of the recession, they're typically about every 10 years. And, plus or minus, there's sometimes, where there's a few of them happen kind of in clusters. But what that results in is ultimately this shrinking of the middle class and a growing of both the lower class, which is not what we want, and a growing of the upper class. So through this, the rich are getting richer, right? during the Great Depression, 1/3 of Americans were financially devastated, but more millionaires were created than any other time in American history. Okay, so these crashes don't always mean negative things to everybody. It just means that there's a further settling and moving away from the middle class. When we think of this, I'll put it like this. I understand, and I will be the first to tell you that there are some financial things that happen that are unforeseen, right? But it's how the banking sectors respond to them, right? And I'll also be the one to tell you that our politicians have been directly resulting into some of these crashes, willingly or unwillingly. Either they were complicit or they're just idiots, given bad advice. Maybe they're just giving bad advice. They didn't have the data, okay? They didn't have the foresight. I'll remove the word idiots. It's just, and I shouldn't even said that. We'll look at, in 2000, Bill Clinton, okay, signed in the Commodities Futures and Modernization Act. This ultimately, we now see, played a major role in the financial crisis of 2008, which led to a global recession. So what Bill Clinton signed in, okay, and not that Bill Clinton's bad, and I'll take that back, more along the lines of we're doing things either willingly or people in power are doing things willingly or unwillingly, or knowingly or unknowingly, that are actually causing these financial collapses. Another example of this is Obama. Okay, Obama orchestrated the largest transfer of wealth to the 1%, and this was done in that time period that was set up by Clinton. Now, I voted for Obama. I'm gonna be really clear. Okay, I thought that he was what the country needed. I've since kind of learned that don't think that voting makes a lot. Well, I'm not, okay, scratch all that. Let's just put it like this. I'm not I don't have an axe to grind with the Democratic Party, is my point. Okay, this is just something that, when I have voted, it has been typically on that side of the line. Okay, but what I'm pointing out is that we need to think about how we can transcend that, because that's when I was in a state where I didn't actually understand what I was doing. Okay, we need to realize that it's one system. Okay, right or left, it's one system, and what each side is doing is contributing to these systematic control. When Obama put it forward, first off, gave $4.5 trillion to Wall Street banks, which is unheard of. And this quantitative easing program, okay, was the reason that the middle class has been decimated. We can look into what quantitative easing is. And in short, it's widely understood by economists that this essentially is a wealth distribution program, which is the primary driver of income equality. Okay, so I want to kind of pull back a little bit here. There's a video I recommend by Noam Chomsky, and he's a libertarian socialist, if you want to understand his lens before you start listening to him. But what he speaks of is this idea that if we want to awaken to the reality of what's really going on in the terms of maybe not even as far as Hegelian dialectic or anything like that, just from this idea of control by debt, control by consumerism. Let's just keep it there for now. We can look through this concept of where Noam Chomsky outlines these kind of 10 principles of concentration, wealth, and power that have created a rapidly growing income inequality, along with a lot of other problems that we find in the U.S. today. And it's no secret that there's been a consolidation of wealth, right? But little to stop to think about why that is, right? We may have these kind of slogans like, occupy this, occupy that, great. But we need to understand really like the cause of these things, right? Noam Chomsky also goes on to say how we are under constant pressure to consume. He writes, all over the place, from the popular culture to the propaganda system, there is constant pressure to make people feel like they're helpless. That is the only role they have, is to ratify decisions and consume. Like, does that resonate? Are you getting that as well? Like, consumerism is this preoccupation of the acquisition of consumer goods that is an external motivator. Okay? Confucius says that we should not be concerned with essentially our consumerism identity. And he puts it in a way where we shouldn't be worried about what we wear, what we drive. We should be thinking about, who we are, right? Jesus, in Luke 12:15 says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Okay? Again, in Hebrews we read, be content with the things that you have. So what's been formed out of that, right? There's been this out of that has been formed this concept of minimalism. And I think that much of minimalism, some of minimalism, I'll put it this way first. Some of minimalism is this idea that we realize, listening to what, Confucius says, listening to what Jesus says, and say, hey, you know what, we are not going to buy into this manufacturing of control. We are not going to buy into this debt, being controlled by debt. We are not going, even though we have the resources to do so, we choose not to. Okay. However, I think I would probably estimate that the majority of the minimalism movement is you can't fire me, I quit rejection of the American dream. It's those that have realized that, they're not going to be able to have, the life that their parents have, and they may not even want that. They may see that what their parents have, they're not even happy as they acquire it. They may see that it's futile even trying to play the game anymore. And so some have, said, I'm going to want less, that way I'm not disappointed. And I know this is below the waterline, so to speak, right? This is diving deeper into the reason why this is. This is just a theory of mine, but ultimately, when I traveled for about 6 months with a group of digital nomads, this is about 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe, I don't know. I really wanted to understand this emerging group, right? Like when I see a new trend happening, I want to understand it. And so I went and traveled for 6 months with digital nomads. And during this, I saw this minimalistic movement, but I saw it mostly through a lens of, giving up a couch for a backpack, right? And, wanting to, show that they have the American dream, or what they identify as the American dream, but also not being able to get it. And so they kind of borrow it, so to speak, right? So they, there's just, and this is a stereotype, okay, but there were a lot of people that were leaving, quitting their jobs with $500 in their bank account, moving to Chiang Mai, thinking that, they're going to get there and learn about how to be a digital nomad and how to do location independence. And some of them did it. Most of them, to be fair, didn't, right? This idea of, again, it was selling a dream even, right? Of taking minimalism and selling a dream that wasn't sustainable. Now, it is sustainable for many people. And so I don't want to speak bad to this. In fact, actually, I think this is a fantastic way to understand other people's perspectives, build a more, a wider worldview, right? Being more conscientious, etc. But there also is this understanding that a lot of the nomads that I was in contact with ultimately realized it wasn't sustainable, and they went into either van life, or now they're into homesteading, or they went back to a corporate job. So there needs to be levels of sustainability in all of this, I guess is the point. Interestingly enough, when we look at what's happening right now, this is maybe a month ago from when I recorded this, China's going through the same rejection, right? And they call it the lying flat movement. And essentially people are giving up. They're saying, look, I'm unable to have this dream, right? And so I'm going to give up. I'm going to, and they call it just lie flat, okay? Hold on. I'm going to take away a toy from my cat because it's, getting louder. Okay. So what's the answer, right? Like we see that we see that in many instances, this level of consumerism is not sustainable. And I'm talking about that just from I haven't even touched about it from an environmental level yet. I'm just talking about it from a personal, professional level in many instances. So to me, when I look at our slavery is tied to our spending habits. And the only way I can see to combat, this, whether it's, this control, whether it's wage slavery, which actually, if you haven't already taken my course on location independence, I talk a lot about wage slavery. But ultimately, the way that to combat this is combating consumerism. Okay, I think that we must do our part to, both as marketers as well as consumers, to be more conscientious of ultimately not buying what we don't need and not buying into things that are external motivators so that we can feel like we're fitting in or feel like we're achieving something. Because when you get it, you're not going to care. I can promise you that, right? I've collected things on a shelf that I thought I needed, and once I had it, I didn't care about it anymore, okay? So when we think through other impacts of consumerism, right, there are environmental issues, right? When we look at just the landfills that are being, wear it twice and throw it away concept, right? Of the, let's just use the fashion industry, okay? But more than that, because we want this disposable type, fashion, this consumerism from this perspective, and it doesn't just mean fashion, it can mean any sort of electronics, right? The fact that we have to have a new iPhone all the time, okay? Who suffers? In addition to the environment, we're perpetuating inhumane working conditions. We are the reason that sweatshops exist, because we've got to buy cheaper, we've got to buy the next thing, the newest thing. And so it creates this economy. I think what's interesting, and I'm going to take it, this is going to be a tangent, but I think that this speaks so much to the idea of manufacturing of consent, and the idea that if you remember back, and most people are not going to remember this, so you're going to have to just research this, but we should not be fooled into those trash heap photos that I just showed you, even though that's real, okay? But when we are shown something that's like visceral, oh, we've got to stop this, right? Well, where is it coming from and what's the agenda behind it, okay? So even with that last slide, this one here, where I'm talking about sweatshops, I'm talking about, this probably brought some sort of emotion like, oh yeah, we got to do better, but that feeling can be turned against you. So even that feeling that I think in this instance from my intent is pure, understand that there are other campaigns going on that are using your desire for equality, your desire for good, your desire for whatever word you want to put on it against you. So here's the example. There have been campaigns created which has been a focus on moving from consumerism, right? Putting the onus from the corporate responsibility onto consumers. This was the case. There was a campaign, if you remember, about the crying Indian, okay? And there's a campaign that sparked the recycling movement in the United States. So recycling was because of this, right? The whole Keep America Beautiful was composed of leading beverage and packaging corporations in conjunction with the Ad Council. So this was the ad. And this was like this is OG greenwashing, okay? Let's skip past the fact that if you research into it, the actor that played the Native American was actually Italian. That's Iron Eyes Cody. Let's just move past that for now, okay? And highlight that the campaign, the whole purpose of the campaign was to make corporate greenwashing, putting the onus on the consumer. So let's talk through this. This was created by a group in Vermont in 1953 to attempt to legislate a group in 1953 attempted to legislate a mandate that deposits must be paid when purchasing a disposable container. So, this group was created ultimately because manufacturers didn't want to have to go out and collect things. It would have cut in their bottom line. So, when companies realized that it was cheaper to move from refillable glass bottles to one-time plastic bottles, right? We started seeing these bottles everywhere, right? And when there was a public outcry on that saying, hey, you guys, corporations, you need to go pick up those bottles because, we used to return these back in. You don't let us turn these back in anywhere, right? Not like the milk cartons used to be picked up. Rather than them claiming that responsibility and saying, yeah, we'll put that program together. No, they hired an ad agency to transfer the responsibility from corporations to consumers. Corporations recycle? No. You should recycle. It's on you to recycle. Okay? Look, do I think we should recycle? Yes. Do I think that corporations have no responsibility in this? No. But we have been manufactured to believe that recycling is 100% the role of the consumer, when recycling is actually every bit as much the role of the manufacturer. They're the ones deciding what type of packaging that they put things in, not us. Now, that said, we also are deciding with the way we vote, right? And we vote with our dollar. So when we are buying things that are unsustainable, we're telling that corporation it's okay to keep doing that. Anyways, this is a bigger topic. I don't even have the energy to get into this one here. I'm going to be honest with you. I just want to point out that you can't jump onto every bandwagon that seems like a good idea, because there may be a hidden agenda behind it. And these hidden agendas ultimately form policies that we may be stuck with for the remainder of until the country falls apart. Okay? And by the way, every country, every civilization, every kingdom has fallen throughout history. So if you think that the United States is going to go on for the next, billion years, think wrong. If you think the United States is going to go on for the next 10 years, I don't know, maybe I'm going to think that. So let's talk about another aspect of this idea of shifting of corporate responsibility. And a piece of that's this idea called planned obsolescence. So where corporations are creating products which are designed to break and become obsolete, right? And this isn't, look, I'm growing my beard out for I'm going to give you my conspiracy course. Believe me, it's next on the list. I've been growing this out for it, okay? We're not there yet. This is stuff that is happening that is super obvious, okay? Not only is companies like Apple contributing to employee suicides, contributing to filling landfills, contributing to sweatshop labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they actually won't allow us to repair our own devices. You can get behind this. If I recommend going to repair.org, we should be fighting for the right to repair. Just because someone has a patent on a technology should not mean that if we buy that technology, that we're not allowed to open it up and have it fixed, swap out parts, and do things like that. So that way it maintains life. iPhones have been literally designed to software to break. Now this is so mainstream, okay? The reason they say that is that we want to slow down some of the features because we don't want it to overheat with new versions of operating systems, etc. Okay, that's mostly BS. It may make sense if you're talking about super old technology, but we're talking about every 2 years. That makes no sense at all, okay? So we're allowing these tech giants, not even tech, let's move past that. We're allowing corporations to dictate the terms on how we consume and even the ownership of what we own. Based on this, we don't even own the iPhone that we purchased. So let's reset. And I want to talk about another aspect of this. And this is this idea of being controlled by hope. or being controlled by fear? We're controlled by hope, by that idea of, chasing the American dream, right? And we're controlled by fear that we've been talking about in groupthink. We've been talking about this in other areas, but we're going to dive deeper into very tangible ways that fear has been changing the way that we, operate. Examples of fear and hope: celebrities, right? We may be controlled through envy, right? Wanting that, what they have, wanting to buy the brands that they have so we can feel like them. Sports, we may be controlled through this proxy of this desire to fit in. Military, we are, when I say we, I'm ex-military, as you may know, U.S. military, and, the American military instills fear into its own population, saying, if we're not out policing, this is what's going to happen. But conversely, the American military instills insane fear, and also I'll talk more about this in another course on cults and brands, where we actually start looking at identifying cults. It's ultimately, look at this. We create things and we put labels on them. And once we've taken this elevated state, you can't ever touch it. So this is a tangent, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'll throw it out there real quick. When we think about something like, what was the rhetoric? Because we have time to look back now. Okay, we have perspective now. We're no longer in the Afghan war directly, right? We're no longer in some of these wars that we were in previously. Iraq, as an example, in the way that we were then. When people were saying, hey, you know what? I don't know why we're in Iraq, because they don't pose a threat to us. Other than oil, let's get past that. The response immediate was, oh, you don't support our troops? Right? And I got this when I was actually in the military, and I was saying, I don't know why we're going to Iraq. This makes no sense. I was deployed just south, about 27 kilometers south of the Iraqi border for about 6 months. And from the intel that I was gathering, it didn't make sense while we were there. Okay? When we look at that response of, you don't support our troops, right? And then next it was, oh, you don't support our firefighters. That was 9/11. It was, you don't support our teachers. You don't support, but any of these groups that the narrative has said are on a higher level, like, hey, this is a reserved status that we don't want to mess with. When we see actually how we really care about them, how do we take care of our veterans? Not really well, to be super honest. How do we take care of the firefighters that served in 9/11? We canceled John Stewart is actually the reason that they still are getting pensions, because that did not get renewed. I'm not sure if you realize that. All of the, what they inhaled during that time period, and all of the medical conditions that came out of the firefighters at 9/11 who were on the ground there, the government didn't care about them. As soon as they become we spend so much money on new technology, but not on old technology, so to speak, because that's what we are. Like, military individuals are property of the government, and it's retired property at a certain point. And granted, there's some benefits, but it's disproportionate. Anyways, this is not what I was getting to. Whole different conversation. Okay, moving it back. Politics, again, we're controlled by which side we want to belong to. Religion controls. Religion is a huge control factor, right? Okay. Big picture is this. If your identity is wrapped around a sports team, your favorite celebrity, a religion, waving a flag, a political, alignment, right? And you're mindlessly consuming information from that, whether it's from a media outlet or from a religious leader, and you're just not rationally processing any of that information for yourself, there's a problem there. And we need to confront how we're being controlled by fear, how we're being controlled by this hope of this desire and longing to fit in. And we need to analyze how much we compromise in exchange for that sense of belonging, right? In exchange for that sense of not wanting to speak out. What's the price of that? Let's go further. TV and media are one of the major factors of hope and fear. If you know anything about storytelling, it's, we're going to be aware of this narrative, right? Of how, I guess we're just trying to think about this, like there's a financial incentive, obviously, to keep people watching TV. Okay, so on the surface, movies make, and TV makes money directly through ticket sales, rentals, subscriptions, whatever it is. But there's a lot more happening behind the scenes that we probably should be talking about, right? And so how are we being subtly manipulated by media? And I'm talking less news, more, entertainment media. So there's some stuff that's funny, okay? Companies pay literally millions of dollars to have their product placement. And some movies make fun of it, and blatantly show, hey, this is product placement. And it's funny because it's in our face. But what about all the products that are being pushed that we may not even pick up on, right? What if it's not as mundane as, clogging your arteries? And what if it's more worse, something that's about something that actually can even control or hurt our health even worse, right? An example of this is smoking, right? Or other harmful, look, if we want to go through the list first, it's going to be sugar, alcohol, firearms, tobacco, right? Those are like the killers, okay? And while cigarette commercials we've pushed those off of TV, thankfully, we haven't been able to get those out of movies. And so we see this inundation of cigarette smoking in movies, and it looks cool, it looks sexy, right? But we don't realize the impact this has on those that are impressioned by this, right? According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 56% of PG-13 movies, I'm not talking about R-rated movies, PG-13 movies. These are movies that, a 13-year-old can go see in a movie theater, okay? 56% of them had tobacco use in it. It's not a coincidence, right? The CDC, the Surgeon General, also concluded that there's a direct correspondence, a relationship between exposure to on-screen smoking and children starting to smoke. They, on their website, cdc.gov/tobacco/data statistics, whatever, you'll find smoking tobacco use. And this facts and fast facts worksheet says that if we could give an R rating to any movie that features smoking, it would prevent 1 million deaths in children. Okay, that means that with 6 out of every 10 movies showing tobacco use, if we could move that 6 out of 10 and label those as R, okay, we could actually save millions of childs dying. This is like heavy stuff.